Welcome to our project on the impact of nuclear explosions and accidents on the environment. Nuclear explosions have been the subject of intense study for decades due to their catastrophic effects on the environment, including human health, ecosystems, and even climate. We will start our documentary with nuclear accidents, beginning with the Fukushima disaster and moving into the Chernobyl disaster. We will explore the environmental impacts of both of these disasters and how they affected surrounding life. We will also examine the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II, which marked the first and only use of nuclear weapons in warfare. We will discuss the immediate and long-term effects of these bombings on the environment and the people who lived in these cities. From this, we will move into the Trinity test site, where the first nuclear bombs was tested in 1945. We will explore the impact of this test on the environment and how it paved the way for the development of nuclear weapons. Lastly, we will discuss the ongoing nuclear weapons programs in North Korea and Russia, exploring the environmental and geopolitical implications of these programs. We hope you enjoy.
At 1446, on March 11, 2011, a magnitude 9.0 earthquake struck 80 miles or 130 kilometers from the coast of Japan. It lasted 6 minutes, causing massive damage and loss of life. Some of the major infrastructures destroyed included multiple reactors of the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear plant. The ensuing tsunami, which hit at 1535, further disabled the plant, causing the cooling of the reactors and the spent fuel pools to fail. Because of these extreme natural disasters, the resulting nuclear disaster was put into motion. Radioactive materials were released from the plant through pressure relief, where uncontrolled radioactive streams, fires, explosions, and leakage and seepage of hundreds of thousands of liters of contaminated water occurred. Unlike Chernobyl, which is the next disaster we will cover, multiple reactors were breached, causing catastrophic damage. Because of the damages to the plant, the environment around the power plant were contaminated, primarily in the Fukushima prefecture. Radioactive fallout from the meltdown was dispersed over land and sea by wind and precipitation. The environment around the plant was irradiated by radioactive iodine and cesium. The iodine was less dangerous to the surrounding wildlife and humans due to its short half-life, meaning it only lasted for 30 days in the environment. However, cesium, with its 30-year half-life, still remains in the environment where it will stay for many years to come. Cesium is the main cause for the remaining radiation level still present in the area around Fukushima. 80% of the radioactive materials were deposited in the Pacific Ocean, where they became diluted quickly. Foodstuffs and water were contaminated, primarily on the leaves of agricultural products such as fruits and vegetables, as well as absorbed in the roots of other plants. Even today, food sold in the country is heavily monitored for radiation. However, almost no food items are still contaminated. A small number of samples of fish and wild mushrooms still contain dangerous amounts of radiation. The wild boar population around the areas have greatly increased in number, and because they eat wild mushrooms in the exclusion zone of the accident, they are highly contaminated even to this day. Radioactive materials were also released into the water, primarily the water that was fed into the reactors for emergency cooling, as well as the groundwater around the reactor. Much of the water, however, was pumped out of the reactor, filtered of its radioactivity. Following the accident, 120,000 people in a radius of 40 kilometers had to evacuate their homes for decontamination. In some areas extending to the northwest of the plant, it is still unsafe to enter without protective equipment. The Japanese government over the last 10 years has consistently worked to decontaminate as much as possible in the affected areas. In some places, several centimeters of topsoil have had to be removed, as well as the gathering of leaves and cleaning of public areas with pressure washers to remove radioactive particles. Contaminated soil and other materials are still kept today in plastic bags in a storage facility around Fukushima. As a result of this accident, goods being imported into Japan now face radiation checks, and another result is that safety standards for enhancing safety in nuclear reactors has been greatly increased. Fortunately, much of the area contaminated could be decontaminated or returned to healthy levels of radiation, which cannot be said of our next topic, Chernobyl.
On April 26, 1986, the number 4 RBMK reactor at the nuclear power plant at Chernobyl, Ukraine went out of control during a poorly designed test to see whether the reactor could still be cooled if the plant lost power. Safety measures were ignored, the uranium fuel in the reactor overheated and melted through the protective barriers. It led to an explosion and fire that demolished the reactor building and released large amounts of radiation into the atmosphere. RBMK reactors do not have what's known as a containment structure, a concrete and steel dome over the reactor itself designed to keep radiation inside the plant in the event of such an accident. Consequently, radioactive elements including plutonium, iodine, strontium, and cesium were scattered over a wide area. The explosions released a cloud of radionuclides that contaminated large areas of Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine. 600,000 liquidators involved in cleanup operations were exposed to high doses of radiation. Nearly 8,400,000 people in Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine were exposed to the radiation. The International Atomic Energy Agency coordinated an assessment of the accident's radiological, environmental, and health consequences in selected towns of the most heavily contaminated areas. Significant health disorders were evident in both control and exposed groups, but none was radiation-related. The only impact as a result of the accident was thyroid cancer that more than 6,000 children and adolescents developed due to exposure to radioactive iodine. The United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation reported in 2000 that apart from thyroid cancer increase, there is no evidence of a major public health impact attributable to radiation exposure 14 years after the accident. There is no scientific evidence of increases in overall cancer incidence or mortality that could be related to radiation exposure. The committee concluded that the great majority of the population is not likely to experience serious health consequences. Ultimately, the health consequences of a nuclear power accident may not be as bad as we think. After the incident at Chernobyl, the nuclear power industry has made significant strides in improving safety protocols and implementing new technologies to prevent similar accidents from occurring. Nuclear power plants must now follow strict guidelines established by organizations such as the International Atomic Energy Agency to ensure that they are operating safely and efficiently. First, nuclear reactors internationally have extensive safety features to prevent large-scale accidents. The Chernobyl reactor had no such features and was unstable at low power levels. Second, federal regulations in countries require extensive emergency response planning for all power plants. Even with the Chernobyl reactor's poor design, officials could have averted many radioactive exposures with an effective emergency response, so now all personnel are trained and practice regular safety drills to prepare for emergencies, including evacuation procedures and communication protocols to ensure that relevant authorities and the public are informed of any potential dangers. Third, the Chernobyl plant operators concealed the accident from authorities and the local population, so the government did not begin evacuations until 36 hours after the accident. In the United States, nuclear power plant operators are required to alert local authorities and advise the public within 15 minutes of identifying conditions that might lead to a significant release of radiation. Lastly, authorities did not promptly disclose details of the Chernobyl accident, so many people unknowingly consumed contaminated milk and food. Now, federal governments would carefully monitor and test food and water supplies that potentially could become contaminated. The government would quarantine and remove any unsafe food or water from public consumption. Overall, the nuclear power industry has made substantial improvements in safety and technology since the Chernobyl incident. Despite the challenges and risks associated with nuclear power, the industry continues to invest in new technologies and safety measures to ensure that nuclear power remains a viable and safe source of energy for the future.
The use of nuclear weapons is one of the most controversial topics of the modern era. The aftermath of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, as well as the Trinity test site, have shown us the devastating impact that these weapons can have on the environment. The environmental impact of nuclear weapons is not only limited to the immediate devastation caused by the explosion. The long-term effects of radiation can persist for decades and even centuries, posing a threat to human health and the environment. The damage caused by radiation posing a threat to human health and the environment. The damage caused by radiation is not always visible. Radiation exposure can cause great genetic mutations in plants and animals, leading to deformities, disease, and much more. On August 6, 1945, the United States dropped the first atomic bomb on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The blast killed nearly 70,000 people, and thousands more died later due to radiation exposure. But the impact of the bomb was not limited to just human lives. The bomb created a massive fireball that vaporized buildings instantly, burned trees, and scorched the earth. The intense heat and radiation released by the bomb also resulted in long-lasting environmental damage, including the death of plants and animals, and the contamination of water and soil. The Trinity test site, located in New Mexico, was the site of the first nuclear bomb test in 1945. The explosion created a massive mushroom cloud that could be seen from miles away. The site was immediately contaminated with radioactive fallout, which caused long-term damage to the environment. The areas around Training Test Site remain barren and uninhabitable even today, decades after the explosion. The soil and water in the region are still contaminated with the radiation, making it impossible for life to thrive there. The radiation released by nuclear weapons can have a long-term effect on the environment. It can cause genetic mutations in plants and animals, disrupt ecosystems, and contaminate water sources. Even a single nuclear explosion can have devastating consequences on the environment. In addition to the immediate impact of a nuclear explosion, the long-term effects can also be catastrophic. The radioactive fallout from a nuclear explosion can travel long distances and contaminate the earth, soil, and water, making it difficult for life to survive.
The impacts of nuclear weaponry on the environment aren't limited to the detonation itself, having massive repercussions even in the production of nuclear weaponry. In North Korea, the government has conducted a number of nuclear tests over the years, which have resulted in a legacy of environmental damage that will persist for generations to come. According to the Congressional Research Service, a committee at the behest of Congress, North Korea engages in the production and mining of plutonium and uranium. A major mining site of uranium for North Korea is Pyeongsan, where close ties have been found between the mining of uranium and serious environmental risks. Plutonium mining involves extracting the radioactive element plutonium from uranium fuel rods in nuclear reactors. Both produce significant radioactive waste, which poses a risk to human health as well as the environment. Additionally, testing nuclear weapons also presents various environmental risks through the radiation involved, releasing radioactive materials into the atmosphere. The long-term effects of radiation can persist for decades, even centuries, after a nuclear test. North Korean citizens suffer greatly from the negative environmental circumstances this creates. Most significantly, North Korean nuclear weapons development has led to major geopolitical tensions and the risk of nuclear conflict, which would be catastrophic for Earth's environment. The situation in North Korea is only exacerbated by the government's lack of transparency and the potential for further nuclear tests in the future. Russia and the Soviet Union also have a long history of nuclear weapons testing, with over 700 tests conducted between 1949 and 1990. These tests have resulted in the release of large amounts of radioactive material into the environment, contaminating soil, water, and air. In these ways, nuclear testing and the production of a nuclear bomb can be just as impactful to the environment as the nuclear bomb's detonation itself.
Despite the dangers and environmental hazards that the nuclear reactor failures have caused, the dangers of unleashing nuclear destruction purposely upon humans is a much greater threat to the environment and all who live on our planet. These accidents are so far and few between, and because of these, the safety of newer plants have been greatly increased. The benefits of clean, long-lasting nuclear energy far outweigh those of the possible dangers of a disaster. For this reason, our solution to making the world a safer, more peaceful place would be to decommission all nuclear weapons and use radioactive materials inside for nuclear energy inside reactors. This way, we will benefit from the denuclearization of the world, as well as reliable energy. Thank you for listening.